I stopped by my sister's house on a Tuesday afternoon because I had leftover soup and nowhere else to be. That's the honest truth. I wasn't checking up on her. I wasn't worried. I just had a pot of chicken soup, her address, and 20 minutes to spare. I wish I could tell you I had some kind of feeling, a sister's intuition, a chill down my spine. But no, I pulled into her driveway, noticed my brother-in-law's car was gone, figured he was at work, and knocked twice. She didn't answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I almost left. My hand was already reaching for my keys when I heard a sound so small I nearly convinced myself it was the wind. A low moan, barely there, coming from inside. I tried the door. It was unlocked. What I found when I walked in is something I will never be able to fully explain to someone who wasn't there. My sister, 31 years old, 8 months pregnant. The most quietly strong person I have ever known was on the kitchen floor, on her hands and knees, alone. Her phone was on the counter, too far to reach. She had been there, she told me later, for almost 40 minutes. I didn't want to scare anyone, she whispered when she saw me. That sentence has lived rent-free in my chest ever since. Her name is Claire. She is 3 years older than me, and she has spent most of her adult life making herself smaller so other people could feel bigger. She married her husband, Marcus, 6 years ago. I stood beside her at the altar and smiled because she was smiling, and because back then, I still believed that love was enough to protect a person. Marcus is not a bad man in the way that phrase usually means. He has never raised his hand. He has never screamed. What he has done, quietly and consistently over 6 years, is made my sister feel like her needs were an inconvenience, like her pain was an overreaction, like asking for help was a character flaw. His mother, Diane, is where he learned it. Diane lives 40 minutes away and has opinions about everything: the way Claire cooks, the way Claire dresses, the way Claire breathes in a room. She has never once, in 6 years, asked my sister how she was doing and actually waited for the answer. She calls Marcus every single day, sometimes twice. His father, Robert, is the kind of man who laughs at everything Diane says and calls it a personality. His younger sister, Vanessa, is 26 and has decided that my sister is competition for reasons I have never been able to fully understand. These are the people who were supposed to show up for Claire. These are the people who were not there. When I found her on that floor, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I went into the very still, very calm place I go when something is actually wrong, and I sat down beside her, and I put my hand on her back, and I said, "I've got you. I'm right here." She started crying then. Not from the pain, she told me later. From the relief. I called 911 first. Then I called Marcus. He picked up on the third ring. I could hear road noise in the background. "Hey," he said, easy and relaxed, like I was calling to chat. "Claire is on the floor in your kitchen," I said. "She's in labor. I've called an ambulance. Where are you?" A pause. Then, "Wait already? She's not due for 3 weeks. Marcus, where are you?" Another pause, longer this time. We drove up to the lake house. My mom wanted to do one last trip before the baby comes. We left this morning. I looked at my sister, still on the floor, still breathing through contractions that were coming faster now, and I made a decision in that moment about what kind of person I was going to be in this situation. "You need to come back," I said. "Now." "Obviously, yeah, we're turning around. How bad is it?" I didn't answer that. I just hung up. The ambulance came in 7 minutes. I rode with Claire and held her hand the whole way and told her everything was fine, even when I wasn't completely sure it was. She kept apologizing. For the inconvenience, for ruining my afternoon, for not calling sooner. "I didn't want to make a big deal out of it," she said, between contractions. "Claire," I said, "you were alone on your kitchen floor." "I know. In labor." "I know. That is literally the definition of a big deal." She almost laughed. Almost. They got her settled into a room. The doctor said she was further along than they'd expected, 5 centimeters, and moving fast. She asked about Marcus. I told her he was on his way. She nodded and looked at the ceiling, and I recognized that look. It was the look of a woman recalculating something she had already calculated 100 times before, and kept getting the same answer she didn't want. Diane called while we were waiting. I answered because Claire's hands were occupied, and because some part of me, I will be honest, wanted to hear what she would say. "Is everything okay?" Diane asked. Her voice had that particular quality concerned on the surface, inconvenienced underneath. "Claire is in the hospital," I said. "She's in labor." A brief silence. "Well," Diane said, "she's a little early, isn't she? The body knows what it's doing. She'll be fine. These things happen." I waited. "We're still about 3 hours out," Diane continued. "The traffic getting out of the lake area on a Tuesday is just terrible. We'll be there when we can," I said, very carefully. She was on her kitchen floor alone for 40 minutes before I happened to stop by. Another silence. Longer this time. "Sweetheart," Diane said, and the word landed like a condescension. "Claire tends to be a little dramatic about these things. You know how she is." I looked at my sister, who was lying in a hospital bed, hooked to monitors, doing the hard and painful and incredible work of bringing a life into the world, and I thought about the word dramatic, and what it means when a woman uses it to describe another woman's pain. "I'll let her know you're on your way," I said, and hung up. Marcus arrived 2 hours and 40 minutes later. His daughter had been born 40 minutes before he walked through that door. Claire had delivered without him. She had delivered with me, holding one hand, and a nurse named Patricia holding the other, and she had been, in the most literal sense, extraordinary. When Marcus came in, still in the casual clothes he'd worn to the lake, I watched my sister's face. She smiled at him. She introduced him to their daughter. She was gracious and warm and kind, because that is who Claire is, and because she had spent 6 years learning to smooth things over so no one had to feel uncomfortable. He held the baby and cried. And I do not doubt those tears were real. But I kept thinking about the 40 minutes on the kitchen floor. I kept thinking about the drive to the lake that morning, Marcus loading the car, kissing Claire goodbye, knowing she was 37 weeks pregnant and leaving anyway because his mother wanted one last trip. I went into the hallway. I needed a minute. That's when I found the bag. Claire had asked me, in the ambulance, to grab the tote bag she kept by the front door, her hospital bag, packed and ready. In the chaos, I'd grabbed it and brought it along without looking inside. Now, sitting in the hallway on a plastic chair outside the room where my sister was meeting her daughter, I reached in for her phone charger, and my hand found something else first. A folder. Thick. Cream-colored, the kind with a clasp. And on the front, in Claire's careful handwriting, 3 words. "In case of." I sat with it for a long moment. I am not the kind of person who reads things that aren't meant for me. I want to be clear about that. But I also knew my sister. I knew how she planned. I knew what it meant that she had packed this folder in the bag she planned to bring to the hospital. She had put it there on purpose. Maybe not for me specifically, but for someone. I opened it. What was inside took me a moment to understand, and then another moment after that to fully absorb. There was a letter written by Claire, addressed to no one in particular, the way you write when you need to put something somewhere outside of yourself. It started with the words, "If something happens to me, I need someone to know the truth." Below the letter were documents, financial documents, bank statements, printed and highlighted. A record of a joint account that Claire had not known existed until 8 months ago when she found the paperwork in Marcus's desk while looking for a pen. An account that had been receiving transfers regular, consistent, substantial from the household account they shared. An account with only one name on it. Not Claire's. Below the bank statements were property records. The house they lived in, the house Claire had believed was in both their names, had been quietly refinanced 2 years ago. The refinance had pulled significant equity out. That equity had not gone into anything Claire knew about. And below the property records was one more document. A consultation summary from a family law attorney, dated 14 months ago. In Marcus's name, he had been planning. Quietly, consistently, the way he did everything. While Claire was decorating a nursery and buying tiny socks and believing that things were difficult, but they were going to figure it out, her husband had been building an exit that she would never see coming. I sat in that hallway for a long time. Then I took out my phone, and I photographed every single page. When I went back into the room, Diane and Robert and Vanessa had arrived. The room was suddenly full of people cooing over the baby, and Diane was crying, and Robert was patting Marcus on the back, and Vanessa was taking photos on her phone, and no one, not one of them, came to sit by Claire. She was in the bed. She had just delivered a baby. She was pale and exhausted, and she was watching her husband's family celebrate in her hospital room like she was a supporting character in their story. I went and sat beside her. "Hey," I said quietly. She looked at me. Her eyes were so tired. "I found the folder," I said, even quieter. Something moved across her face. Not surprise, not panic. Something closer to relief, the same relief I'd seen when I found her on the kitchen floor. The relief of someone who has been carrying something alone for too long, and finally feels another pair of hands take some of the weight. "I didn't know if I was ready," she said. "You don't have to be ready right now," I said. "Right now, you just had a baby. Right now, you just rest." She nodded. She looked at her daughter, asleep in the plastic hospital bassinet beside the bed. "She's so beautiful," Claire said. "She really is. I want her to grow up, knowing she doesn't have to be small," Claire said. "I don't want her to learn what I learned." I squeezed her hand and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said better. In the weeks that followed, I helped Claire find an attorney. A real one, working on her behalf this time. The documents in the folder were exactly what they appeared to be: methodical, deliberate, and ultimately, the thing that changed everything. Because Marcus had not known she'd found them, and he had not known she'd had them copied, and he had certainly not known that his wife, who he had spent 6 years underestimating, had quietly built a record of everything. The attorney said the same thing I thought when I read those documents. This had been planned, which meant it could be unplanned. The refinance had not been properly disclosed. The transfers had paper trails. The consultation with the other attorney actually worked against Marcus in the end because it established intent and timeline. I will not pretend the next several months were easy. They were not. There were days Claire called me crying, and days she called me furious, and days she called me both at once. There were weeks where Diane made her life miserable in the specific way only mothers-in-law can, using access to the baby as a bargaining chip, calling mutual friends, telling a version of the story that cast Claire as unstable. Claire is not unstable. Claire is one of the most clear-headed people I know. She is also, I have come to understand, someone who confused being selfless with being safe. She thought making herself small would protect her. She thought being easy to be with meant she would never be left. She was wrong. But she was also still here, and she was also still standing, and she was also raising a daughter she had decided would know something different. Marcus did not get what he planned for. The attorney made sure of that. Claire got the house properly, legally, in her name. She got child support. She got a settlement that reflected what had actually been moved out of their shared finances. She did not get everything back. But she got enough to start. She called me the day it was finalized. I was in the grocery store, and I stepped into the cereal aisle and just stood there while she talked. "It's done," she said. "How do you feel?" A pause. "Lighter," she said. "I feel lighter." I thought about that folder, about the careful handwriting on the front, about a woman who had been quietly preparing for the worst while still hoping every day it wouldn't come, about what it means to love someone who is building their life around you while simultaneously building a door behind your back. I thought about the kitchen floor, the soup I'd brought that I never even heated up, the 40 minutes she'd spent alone before I knocked. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yeah." "The folder. When did you put it in the hospital bag?" A long pause. "The night before," she said. "I couldn't sleep, and I was sitting in the nursery just thinking, and I thought if something goes wrong, I need someone to be able to find this. So I put it where I knew someone would look." "You packed it the night before," I said, slowly. "And then I showed up the next day." "Yeah." I didn't say what I was thinking, that sometimes things work out in ways that feel too precise to be accidents. That sometimes the right person knocks at the right moment, and it changes everything. I didn't say any of that, because Claire would have found a way to minimize it, to say it was just luck, to make it smaller than it was. Instead, I said, "I'm really glad I had leftover soup." She laughed. A real laugh, full and unguarded, the laugh I remembered from when we were kids, before she learned to make herself quiet. That laugh was the best thing I heard all year. Her daughter's name is Sophie. She is 7 months old now, and she has no idea what her mother went through to give her a life without walls around it. She doesn't know about the folder, or the kitchen floor, or the attorney, or the account. She doesn't know that her mother chose something harder and realer than the life she'd been handed. She will know, someday. Claire will tell her, not to burden her, but because Claire believes, and I believe too, that the women who come after us deserve to know what the women before them were willing to do. Diane called me once, after everything was settled. I don't know why she called me instead of Claire. Maybe she thought I was the easier target. She said that Claire had made choices that hurt the family, and that I had encouraged her, and that she hoped I understood the damage I had done. I let her finish. Then I said, she was on her kitchen floor alone for 40 minutes, in labor, because you decided it was a good week for a lake trip. Diane didn't say anything. I have to go, I said. And I hung up. I am not someone who typically talks about the things that happen in my family. I believe in privacy. I believe in letting people write their own stories. But I have been thinking about how many women I know who have made themselves small and quiet and easy, who have told themselves it was love when it was actually just survival, who have spent years believing that their pain was an overreaction, their needs were too much, their voice was the problem. My sister is not dramatic. My sister has never been dramatic. My sister was on her kitchen floor, in labor, alone, because the people who were supposed to show up for her decided their comfort mattered more. What she did with what she found in that desk drawer quietly, carefully, without anyone knowing was not dramatic either. It was something much more powerful than drama. It was clarity, and it was the thing that saved her. I showed up with soup. She had already saved herself. I just helped her carry what she'd already had the wisdom to prepare. That's the part of the story I keep coming back to. Not the attorney, not the documents, not the settlement. The folder. The careful handwriting. The woman who couldn't sleep, sitting in a nursery at 2 a.m, deciding that her daughter would not grow up watching her disappear. She put the folder in the bag. And then she let me find it.